Do you want to know something completely insane? On my journey to mastering discipline and while also coaching people beat procrastination, I noticed a very interesting pattern. Men who are also heavy procrastinators have four seemingly innocent habits that they do regularly, and once they stop, procrastination vanishes and discipline becomes effortless. So, by the end of this video, you're going to know what these four habits are with the four easy alternatives that end procrastination forever. Hi, my name is Fasi and I'm a certified expert coach. And if you're serious about beating procrastination once and for all and you're looking for professional help with it, schedule a free strategy call with me where we'll go in much more detail in your specific situation with the exact steps to get you out of it. The first habit is something that we are all guilty of. Around 1.5 years ago, I was coming back home through public transport and I saw something that absolutely horrified me. So there's this dude watching a movie on his phone with one of his hands and he was playing Candy Crush on another of his phone using his other hand. He was doing both of those things simultaneously. It was as if just watching the movie was not enough for me. Now, this is just an extreme example of the first habit that we are all guilty of, which is avoiding boredom at all costs. Let me explain. You probably consider boredom to be a state that is to be avoided at all cost. In fact, you've been conditioned to think that since your childhood. There's this saying here in India, which goes something like "Khali dimag shaitan ka ghar hai," which literally translates to an empty brain, an empty mind is the devil's home. And for me personally, boredom was a game changer because it not just allowed me to become more disciplined, it doubled my creativity, it increased my self awareness, it reduced overthinking, and it also made me more focused. Here's how. So, whenever I sit in my boredom time, yeah, I have a boredom time. Maybe earlier that day or a day prior, I had watched or consumed a beautiful podcast, or I had read an amazing book, or I was a part of lovely conversation which was very mentally stimulating. So I absorbed all of that amazing information. And when I sit for my boredom time, my mind brings all of the information that I consumed up to surface and it processes it. It runs all of that information through the filter of me. So my beliefs, my emotions, my perspective of life, it runs all of that information through that filter. And what happens is when that information is run through that filter, there's an element of me added to it. There's an aspect of me added into that information. And that is exactly how I come up with these videos and mostly everything I talk about on my channel. It is through that process of running everything through that filter, which makes it genuine to me. It makes all that information my own. Also, when you sit in boredom, your mind engages in an activity, a process called autobiographical thinking. There's researches around this, and what it is your mind looking at your entire timeline, your entire life objectively. And it looks at where you're coming from and where you want to go, and it just looks at it from a bigger perspective. It just analyzes your lives. And when your mind engages in autobiographical thinking, what it does, it helps you find your purpose. It sees where you're going, it sees whether you're satisfied with that or not, and this process enables you to find what's true to you and what makes sense to you. And when you find that purpose and when you find that thing that just makes you click, just draws you towards it, discipline just becomes a child's play. More so, doing nothing instead of consuming the absolute shit that is there online these days, it reduces your tolerance to dopamine, because boredom is a state of lack of stimulation, and this lack of stimulation lowers down or resets your dopamine levels, which in turn makes you more motivated, more focused. So if you do nothing and you just set a time in your day where you sit for boredom without any stimulation, you'll become more focused, more motivated, more disciplined, You'll find your purpose, you'll become more self aware because of autobiographical thinking, and it also makes you a better person. So, there's research in which participants who sat in boredom and did nothing, the participants basically got bored, and when they got bored they were likely to make bigger amount of donations and donate more blood as opposed to the participants who just entertained themselves and didn't weren't part of that boredom group. Dr. K in this video suggests at least an hour of boredom time before you sleep. So he's like, you anyways can't go to sleep, just fucking stare at a wall and get all of those benefits. But I can see how that could be a little overwhelming for someone who is used to bombarding themselves with stimulation. So start with 15 to 30 minutes, maybe stare at a wall, stare at the ceiling, go for a lone walk without distraction, and that will do the trick for you. But what you can also do is take charge of your in between movements. Randoris calls them in between movements. What these are moments in your days where you have free time or time when you're doing nothing. Maybe when you're waiting in a line, or maybe while you're commuting. Instead of pulling out both of your phones and watching a movie and scrolling, like playing Candy Crush, you can just sit in these in between moments. You can sit with yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, whatever comes up. Just stay with yourself without any distraction. And even just taking charge of these in between moments will give you a lot of those benefits. It's not as effective as setting out an hour to stare at the wall, but it will still give you a lot of those benefits that I just mentioned above. When I stopped the second habit, my life literally flipped 180-degree. Have you ever had this experience when you're feeling on top of the world, just excited, motivated, and maybe something happens, you get a call, you hear some bad news, and all of that motivation just vanishes in thin air? You just lose the desire, the urge to do anything. Maybe you don't even feel like eating food. What happened there? Around 3 years ago, my default state was numbness. I talk about this on my channel, but I was completely emotionally numb, disconnected from my emotions. And in that numb state, the only way I knew to motivate myself to be disciplined and get stuff done was through force, effort, and willpower. That's the only way I knew of. And now, looking back to it, I compare it to hitting on both the accelerator and the brake. And once I started processing those emotions, getting comfortable feeling them, and letting go of that tense trauma, it was almost as if I let go of the brakes and now could freely hit on the accelerator or gas. And that unleashed all of this motivation that was stuffed underneath these emotions. One of the easiest way I suggest someone starting out on this journey is to download this app called How We Feel. What this app does, it's a beautiful app. What this allows you to do is it enables you to label what you're feeling with precise words. And naming what you're feeling in the moment with precise words is a proven method to process what you're feeling, which will in turn make you more disciplined. So I don't see any reason why you shouldn't get this app. By the way, if this is resonating with you so far, and if you think I can help you with these habits in your life, book the free strategy call and we'll discuss things further. The third habit you do at least thrice a day and it wrecks your discipline. There was this interesting experiment done in a lab in which the participants were asked to do mentally draining tasks which would drain their self control. So, tasks like mental puzzles, avoiding distractions or deliberately avoiding distractions, and like suppressing their emotions. So, it turns out suppressing emotions also drains your self control. Another reason to download that app. And what the researchers did, they divided the participants into groups, gave one of the participants lemonade with sugar in it, and gave the other half of participants lemonade without sugar, with artificial sweeteners. What happened with the sugar group was their glucose level started increasing, and this replenished their self control. So their self control almost came back up like the health bar. But with the group who were given and artificial sweetener drink, their self control continued to deplete and get worse. So the researchers concluded that increasing glucose levels are associated with increasing willpower. So it increases willpower, while decreasing glucose levels continues to decrease your willpower. It's almost like we are our worst selves when our glucose levels are dipping. And in fact, there's research that shows men are more likely to cheat on their partners when they have low glucose levels. That is how strong of an effect it has on us. So, is sugar the secret to willpower? Is that what is needed or at all times? No, there's a smarter way around this. In the afternoon, I have this protein shake which has 2 to 3 bananas in it. And these carbohydrates gives me something called a glucose spike, which is followed by a glucose crash. And if I have a coaching session in the evening, I often am found yawning, I feel lethargic, and it's just embarrassing. So, what I did to counteract this was I applied 2 to 3 hacks from this book that allowed me to beat these spikes and crashes that have all of these negative effects. The book Glucose Revolution has 10 hacks that you can apply, but here are my top three, my favorite three that I do regularly. The first one is movement, that is moving after you eat. So just moving your muscles, it can be anything like squats, push-ups, pull-ups, calf raises, taking something heavy and doing bicep curls, anything that gets your muscles, that exercises your muscles. Even something as simple as a 10-minute walk does the trick. The second hack is eating food in the right order. So if you do nothing, take what you're eating and just rearrange its order. It reduces the glucose spike by 72%. Just think about it. If you do nothing and just change the order in which you eat, it dents the spike by 72%. That's how powerful this step is. So, what's the right order? It's fiber first, followed by fats and protein, and then followed by carbs and sweets last. And I can see and have first hand experience of how this might be inconvenient. This or following this order might be inconvenient in a lot of situations. So what I like to do is I like to start my meal with a salad or a lot of fiber. Then I try to include as much protein as possible in my meal. And then if I feel like it, I conclude it with a dessert. I never ever ever eat something sweet before my meal because it causes a huge glucose spike. And then finally, a hack that I don't do regularly, but my mother does at least 2 times a day, is drinking a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in a glass full of water. And what this does is the apple cider vinegar triggers your muscles to suck that extra glucose out of your bloodstream. Now, there are testimonials in the book where people have cured their type 1 and type 2 diabetes just by following these simple hacks. So, they are extremely powerful, don't discount them. The fourth habit is all about that voice in your head. I had a client of mine and it was difficult for him to stick with things. He would make up a resolution like going to gym. He would do that for a month, maybe two, and something would happen. Maybe he would fall sick, and then after recovering, he just fell off the wagon. He couldn't get back on that trail. And his issue was not motivation because he was a motivated guy. I could see that, but rather the way he talked to himself. Whenever he would experience such setbacks or failures that I just mentioned, he would criticize himself a lot. He would beat himself down. And I'm sure you're aware of this little voice, maybe a bigger voice that's there, which is always ready to criticize you at the smallest of mistake. Maybe you make a small mistake, maybe you say something wrong in a group conversation, and that voice is just, you're stupid, everyone thinks you're stupid, you're worthless, no one's ever gonna like you. That voice is just always there. And this voice kills your discipline. There's research in which dieters who were kind to themselves for breaking a diet, so maybe they ate chocolates, were more likely to stick to the diet in the long run as compared to the dieters who broke their diet and then were self critical and self judgmental. And the reason for that is the feeling of shame and guilt. This feeling of shame and guilt around that setback makes it difficult for you to look at it objectively makes it painful rather. So if you don't look at that setback, and if you don't look at it and learn from it, and if you live in denial, you are more likely to make the same mistake, which is what happened with my client and which is what happened with the dieters. So the way I countered this strong tendency and this strong voice in my head was this mentality, was this mindset of treating myself like my own child. So would I ever call my child a fucking loser for not going to the gym or ruining their phone in rain? No, I fucking won't. And that's a real example, by the way. So if I won't say it to my child, I don't say it to myself. Instead, what I do is whenever I experience a setback, I say to myself in a kind voice, that's okay, it's only human to make mistakes. What can you do better the next time? Now, if you're ready to undo these habits in your life specifically and cure procrastination permanently, book that free strategy session. There's a lot of value you'll get out of it for free. So do it right now, because for the month of June, I'm opening only 5 spots and I'll see you there. So if you replace the habits of avoiding boredom, numbing your emotions, self criticism, and glucose spikes with the 4 alternatives I shared, discipline will become a child's play for you. But these are just 4 of the 30 steps I share in this free course. So if you'd like to become more disciplined and destroy procrastination once and for all, you can click here.